Yeah, I'm Mandi Walls. I am a DevOps advocate at PagerDuty. If you would like to get in touch with me on the socials, I'm LNXCHK. You can also always, like old school, email me. That's totally fine too. Like if you still have email, it's great. I love this picture because it's like, hey, someone from the internet is calling and I'm sure it's for you, right? And that's what we're going to talk about today. In the meantime, though, the only time I'm going to actually mention PagerDuty is like we have a raffle and you can win Lego Millennium Falcon. We're going to draw it at 1:30. I'll have this at the end too. But like I want to like set the stage, right? Who currently is part of an on-call rotation? Who's currently on call today right now? Oh, a few people. Always a few, right? I feel kind of bad. Like I'm on call incident commander at PagerDuty and I was supposed to have a shift this week, but I'm here. So I traded it off, and the poor dude got stuck with like 4 events. And I'm like, I totally owe you a shift on that one, but not really, right? So kind of feel bad, kind of happy to be here, right? So as we're talking about on-call, we kind of have a feeling for what that means in sort of a like existential dread kind of way. But what we're really after is we've built all of these amazing systems that users love, but they love them at weird times, right? Like you can do your banking at 3 o'clock in the morning. You can order your groceries like any random old time. So users are expecting a lot of our systems to be up and responsive and performative and ready to go anytime, anywhere. And that makes our job a lot harder, right? And I'm a recovering sysadmin, so I tell folks, and spent a lot of years on call in the bad old days. And it's hard, right? And it can really suck. So we're gonna talk about some ways to think about improving the culture around your on-call rotations, how to help teams cope, right, with being on-call, and how to sort of think about that. But we're really into formalizing the practice because it's really easy to fall into sort of ad hoc, kind of like, oh, I don't know this thing, but we're just gonna call Gary because like Gary probably knows it, regardless of what Gary is doing or where he is, right? And that's not fair to Gary, like he's got things to do too, right? So we're going to try and formalize all of our processes so that folks know what to expect and also when to not expect to be called. So what are we doing, right? Like what's our goal? We've got customers, they're using our stuff all the time. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, someone wants to order their groceries, whatever it is. So it's really after improving our reliability, that big capital R in SRE, right? And unfortunately, distributed systems can get wobbly and fail any time, right? Like it's like the weather, like you just don't even know when things are going to get a little bad. So we put ourselves out there to like be in a place where when something goes wrong, doesn't matter what time it is or where you are, that you have a subject matter expert at the other end of that notification, right? Someone who knows what's going on in the system. And that's going to help us manage the sort of stressful, chaotic process that sometimes gets reflected when we're responding to incidents. We also want to minimize how much time it takes to get that system back in a place where the users are happy again, right? Even if it's only a handful of them in the middle of the night. And the last one here, minimizing handoffs and context switching. Super important is like a game of telephone, right? You've got a Zoom call started and people are trying to triage and then the next person comes on and like, what's going on? And you have to go back through the whole story of what's going on and what you're seeing. So we want to try and minimize how much time we're spending rehashing everything by getting the right people on the call as fast as possible, right? So we formalize this into on-call rotations and on-call practices, right? And in the bad old days, when I was a systems administrator, right, we were on the receiving end of like just code that's thrown over the wall. And like engineering is like, here's a tar ball, and here's 5 lines of instructions of how to put it together. Oh, and also, we built it with all the configs for dev, so you're gonna have to unwrap the tar ball, change all the config files for prod, and then try and load it up. And you're like, thanks, I had nothing else to do today, so that's amazing. And hopefully we've come a little improved from then, right? Like we're doing DevOps, so we've got SRE, and there's all this great stuff going on. So now we are in a place where we have more folks who can share some responsibility for the production environment, right? And that's super scary. A whole lot of people who have never been on call before, like, they want me to be on call. They told me they're gonna make me be on call. And they freak out, right? And that's not what we want from people. We want them to be sort of excited. What we're after is improving customer experience. We want to minimize downtime. We want to improve reliability. And that means that the folks who don't know anything about the system aren't the ones that we're going to be calling first if they can't actually fix the problem. So when we go into some customers and they're like, well, we've got these reliability issues, we've had some outages, we really want our application developers to have a bigger part in the production performance of the systems, and we're going to put them on call, but they're all freaking out. So what do we do? How can you help us? So we want to start with the benefits of on-call for application teams, right? And when you're talking to your peers who are doing like straight up application development, and they're not used to being on call, we want them to be proud of the performance of their applications. We want them to be engaged with the full life cycle of the things that they are creating. What happens to it when it meets customers in the wild, and hopefully it does what it's supposed to do. But if it doesn't, I can't help you. Like, you gotta come in here and take a look at it yourself, right? So we want to know, help them take that feedback loop and shorten it so that I'm not in the middle of that conversation between what's going on in production and what engineering knows about the thing. So we're going to put an on-call rotation together so that we can be very explicit about our expectations. We want folks to know when to be available, not just randomly like, oh, we think Gary can fix this, and it doesn't matter where Gary happens to be. We want folks to know, hey, next week you're on call, and know explicitly that's what's expected. We want everyone else to know who to call. Well, you're application A and that team, we're having a problem reaching you guys, so we want to know who to call when we've got a problem. Like, you are the Ghostbusters on application A. And then we want to know exactly and explicitly what you can be called for. I don't want to be called for stuff I don't know anything about. I don't want to be called for stuff my team isn't responsible for. So we want to create these relationships and build this sort of knowledge out of our topology that like these systems are owned by these teams, and these are the folks that are going to be on call for that during this week, so that everyone has a full path from wobbly user experience to person who knows exactly how to fix that as quickly as possible. And in a lot of organizations, that it can be kind of tricky. So we want to be super explicit about it. Unfortunately, the biggest question, the first question we ever get is, do you pay people extra for this? I used to put this at the end, and then I'd rant and be like, over time. So we'll move this slide up, because people always ask. And I can say I am not a lawyer, and I don't work in HR. And your first step is always going to be talk to your in-country HR. Because there's going to be different rules, different laws. You can tell from my accent, I'm from the United States, and we don't have labor laws, right? So like, I can totally walk into another company and say, hey, you team, you're absolutely going to be on call from now, and your only option is to quit if you don't want to, right? And that's not the same as it is in other places, right? So definitely take a first glance through your labor laws, talk to your legal teams, talk to your HR teams about what's going on there. Then you can talk to your industry peers. What are other companies that look like you, same size as you, doing similar work, what are they doing? Some folks have been really public about publishing their practices. Other times, you just kind of hear through the grapevine that, this team over here, they pay $1,000 a week for an on-call rotation, right? And it's volunteer only. And they're like, I volunteer to take $1,000. Like, that sounds great. And then ask your team too, like what they want to do. Because some folks will take time off in lieu. Some folks will want the extra pay. They might want another benefit or something else like that. So we don't have any specific guidance about this because we're not lawyers, but there was a poll done by the guy who writes Pragmatic Engineer, and there's some really good information there. We're not associated with him, but it's a really nice post that goes through practices across different countries, different industries, different team sizes, bit of different engineer functionality to give you sort of a place to start, and especially if you want to have that conversation with your boss. Like, hey man, everybody else is paying extra, why can't we get extra? Because really, you should, right? I can say you should. So that's out of the way, right? So let's set some baselines for some the other stuff that comes up when folks are looking at being on call. Prior to 2020, this one was really kind of bizarre, right? Because we'd still run into folks who'd be like, oh yeah, the on-calls, like when they get paged, they have to come into the office to do the thing. And you're like, that's really dumb. Like, have you heard of this thing called a VPN? Maybe they hadn't. But one of the benefits, I guess, of the pandemic and a lot more work from home is that more folks do have gear at home that they can use for work, and that's great. So if discussions come up that folks should replace their laptops with a desktop and go back into the office all the time, and you're like, what are we gonna do about on-call? That discussion has sometimes come up as well. There's other stuff to think about here too, right? You're thinking about the redundancy, you're thinking about the risks that you're taking on when the folks that need to be responsive are based in their homes, right? So more companies we're seeing are giving internet benefits, like an extra X number of coins per pay period to pay for better internet access and things like that as additional benefits for the folks that are being on call, just to make sure that they are in an environment that is conducive to that. We also want to make sure that everybody has the right access before they're paged at 3 a.m., right? Because like, yeah, my help desk also has an on-call, but like, I don't want to have them be my first stop because I don't have access to something and I didn't check it, right? So it's a good idea for teams to have a checklist, and you can do this with onboarding, but also refresh it, right? This is sort of one of those living documents you want to make sure that you're maintaining for your team. Access to any of the stuff that you might need, just in case GitHub isn't available, just in case we can't get to some other service that we use and we're having an emergency, right? So making sure that folks have explicitly maintained those things, have them updated. We're constantly getting like little things in our Slack channels, like somebody's having trouble with AWS Okta or whatever that is, like just making sure all of those pieces work before someone goes on to on-call. We also like folks to have handoff meetings, especially when they're just getting used to a team being on call. And some folks do this sort of organization-wide because all the shifts change at the same time, and you kind of have a debrief, and that's great. Our teams tend to shift at different times during the week, so it's a team-by-team meeting, but it gives the opportunity for the person coming off of on-call to have a chat with the rest of the team and the person coming on to the on-call to say, this thing's been wobbly all week, here's what we did to it, put this shim in it to try and fix it, or like, this team is having a degraded experience right now, and this is what we're doing about it, or the documentation for this team has moved, and here's the updated stuff, and here's the note we made about it, just so that in the living distributed system, people are up to date on all the information that's constantly changing, right? Any kind of recent deployments or unresolved incidents or any kind of queued work that might still be sitting around. It's good to be very explicit about that and not just assume people saw it sort of fly by in the Slack channel. So thinking a little bit about what we are asking people to do, right, is be available when they normally wouldn't be. And it's also good to think about what we're not asking them to do. And some folks are really bad at this. They're very nervous about being on call, and it adds a lot of stress for them, and they mitigate that by being over-engaged, right? And I've seen this on teams that I've been on in the past, where the on-call engineer just spends their entire time, and I will date myself and say, reloading netcool, but those were the days, right? But you don't have to do that, right? Your on-call engineer shouldn't be expected to solve absolutely everything that comes through. We're all gonna bump up against the edge of our knowledge on things that come through. We also don't want them to sit on every incident. You're in a distributed environment. There's lots of different things that you plug into. Unless something is wobbly that really directly impacts you, like, don't hang out on their outage call. Like, I still have nightmares about one of my earliest on-calls at a previous job because I was on the flagship application and we had a backend, like deep backend dependency that only one dude knew how to run. And like when it was wobbly, like everybody was on the call. I feel so bad for him. Like he's the only guy in the whole company who knows how to fix this thing and we're all sitting around waiting. Like that's terrible. Like he can just tell us, right, when it's ready to go. So we don't also want to spend every waking moment on alerts, right? That's a path to burnout like nobody's business, right? PagerDuty or whatever else is going to let you know when something happens. You don't have to sit there and reload the blinking lights and wait for something to happen, right? You can go off and do other things for a while. And the last one here in the bottom left, and I will absolutely reiterate this later, is that on-call is work, right? It's unplanned work, but it is still work. So what does that mean? It means you're going to have hours in your shift that you will be doing this work and not the stuff off the planning board. You cannot hold a regular workload if you're also doing on-call on an active system. I come across this way too often, right, with the teams that we talk to. They're expected to, the engineers are on call, but they're also expected to do as many story points or whatever else they're supposed to be working on that week. And that's completely unrealistic. Any given sprint or whatever you're doing, at least one of your engineers is going to be on call. That person is not doing a full engineering load during that shift. They have other things that you're expecting them to do that relate to reliability, that relate to the risk of your systems, whatever else comes up. And that is also work, and you have to budget for that. We also want to take a look at on-call and life balance. It's totally possible to come onto a shift and like things are blowing up all over. It's crazy. The first 48 hours, like 6 different Sev 1 things going on, and you're exhausted, and you haven't slept, and you haven't showered. You should be able to raise your hand and say, man, I got to tap out, right? Because this has been too intense. And you want to make sure you are fostering a team that allows that, right? So that folks can raise their hand and say, look, man, I am drowning. I need some help, right? So that you can change things around. Maybe you have a backup who can take a couple of hours or an overnight so that someone can get sleep, right? Because your engineers are not going to be in a mental place to fix complex issues if they're exhausted, right? Come in late the next day. And don't like start rumors, oh, Mark came in late this morning. I'm like, yeah, because Mark was up 5 hours last night fixing stuff, right? We also want to have empathy, right? We're building a supportive culture. We're supporting each other. And our goal here is the reliability and good customer experience. And along with that, we have to know that we can rely on our team. People are going to be supportive of what we're doing. It's hard, right? A lot of this work is stuff that nobody else does, right? Some of it's super weird. And we don't want to be in a place where people feel like they're being mentally drained just from the interaction with their team, right? So there's a lot of cultural stuff that gets built into that. And you can like bring in all that cultural DevOps stuff that people have been shouting at you for the last few years, right? Because the other big one is psychological safety. This plays a huge part in incident response. I'm an engineer on my own, right? I'm sitting here, maybe like I'm on a call, there's like a customer support guy, maybe a database engineer, and we're trying to fix a thing. I need to be on a team where I feel safe to try the thing I think is wrong without coming in the next morning and being berated. Mandi, what'd you do? That was stupid. Why'd you try that? I wouldn't have done that. That was dumb, right? That's not the culture we want, right? It's 2 a.m. I didn't call you. You should be thankful I didn't call you, right? Just because I didn't do exactly what you would have done. So having a place where those teams are psychologically safe. They're a place that it's safe to take risks, and that applies as much to incident response as it does to anything else, any other conversation that you would have there. There's lots of really good stuff about psychological safety, if that's a new term for you. Tom Garrity, who's over here in the UK, has a really good site for that. We also want to give a place to learn, right? We want to give our new engineers an opportunity to get used to this stuff, because quite often, like, they may not have had to do this before. I don't think anybody has like a how to be on call unit in their boot camp, but maybe they should, right? So giving folks a way to see how your incident response process actually works, we call this shadow rotations. So when folks are new to our organization, they get added to shadow rotation so they can see, here's the mechanics of how all of this works. So they're not just paged at 2 a.m. and expected to know how to find the Zoom call, how to find the Slack channel, how to escalate to another team. They kind of get a feel for this in what we call sort of listen-only mode. So they'll be on the shadow rotation and a page will come through to their team and they can join the call just to listen, right? Just to see how their peers are interacting with other folks from the organization, how the mechanics work, who's going to write the post-incident review, all that stuff, so that you get a good feel for building that muscle memory so that it's less stressful when you're actually in an incident of your own. We also have a mantra at PagerDuty we call never hesitate to escalate. And some people think, oh, escalate to my boss, to like the manager, but it's more about escalating to peers, right? Bringing in folks where we're receiving a signal from our systems that indicate that your stuff is not doing what we're expecting it to do. So I want to be able to reach out to those teams whenever I need to. And they're expecting to have that happen, right? That it's not imaginary. I'm not just making this up because I'm lonely and I want someone else on the call with me, right? I need some help from whoever's running Kafka today, whatever it is, right? So complexity, right, complicates all of our diagnoses. I'm getting a signal from my system, it's telling me this little thing, but it really looks like I'm having trouble talking to this other system over here. I'm looking in the alerts, I don't see an alert for their system, but I can't tell if they're even seeing my requests, so I'm gonna start looking for people who can help me diagnose beyond the horizon of my knowledge and access, right? It also gives me an opportunity to say, you know what, it looks like this is a back-end issue. Let's pull those folks in, and once they get diagnosed, like maybe I'm just a stakeholder now, I'm not actively participating because we're looking at an issue that's on that system. We want to keep the focus on the folks who can fix the thing, not the folks who are just going to poke at it and hope, right, that it might be something they can fix. So a couple things about etiquette and expectations, right? Because this is where the scary parts come in, right? Folks kind of can get their brains around, oh, I'm going to fix things when things go wrong. But also, like, you want to set up some good practices with your team. Like, what is your response time? What are you expecting there? Is it 5 minutes? Is it 10 minutes? Is it, we're going to ignore this until we get to this point of our SLO? Like, whatever those are, make sure you're talking about that. Making sure that if things are really busy, that you can trade shifts around so that folks can sleep. That'll help you keep an eye on burnout, right? We also want to talk about equal participation. I know there are folks out there who love an excuse to use OnCall to not have to go to their family's house for a holiday. I get it. I don't want to be your therapist. I don't want to hear it. You can take the holidays, but we want to make sure we're as equal as possible, right? Holiday coverage is super interesting. PagerDuty, part of our engineering team is in the US, part of it's in Canada, part of it's in Lisbon, right? So like, hey man, nobody has to work on their own Thanksgiving because they're all different, right? So you can take advantage of that stuff. You get these extra benefits if you happen to have teams that are based in different countries or have different cultures and therefore different holidays. Then we also want to talk about good behaviors. And this is kind of a funny one, but also one of those weird conversations because like, I don't know if you've ever joined a call and like the other engineer that's there has obviously been having some like adult refreshments before they join the call. And you're kind of like, man, is there somebody else from your team who could take a look at this, who maybe hasn't been like hanging out with Snoop Dogg tonight, you know? And we see this more in the US because we've been legalizing cannabis in different places. But like, it's kind of one of those weird things. And like, if somebody's been out on a Thursday night for Thirsty Thursday and had a pint and a punch up, you probably don't want them to be your on-call engineer that night. So, you know, it's a tough conversation to have with your team, but like, do it, right? So the folks know. And I will reiterate this one because I run up against it so often, right? I'm just gonna bang it into you. Like, lower regular workload during on-call weeks. That is gonna be the biggest thing that's gonna help people cope with being on call, is that they won't feel quite so overburdened with the expectations of their regular workload as well as the unpredictability of being on call, right? These are big things that will help folks. I'll just kind of hand wave through this one because Paige covered it really well yesterday, making sure that your alerts aren't dumb. They're actionable, they're useful, they're meaningful. They actually have some purpose and they aren't just there because it looks nice, right? So clear up your noise, disable your junk so that when something does come through to a human being, it needs a human being and isn't something that can be fixed with a small shell script. Also, don't over-prioritize projects. Focus on customer experience. If you have stuff that is in beta, is only for a few customers, like stick an SLO on that thing and like just alert when you're gonna blow through it. Do not over-prioritize. And then keep an eye on your people, right? This is another good thing that Paige covered yesterday about burnout, and she had some good tools in her talk about measuring that for your teams. But like making sure that folks aren't on call too much, that they haven't been spending too many out of hours times with incidents and things like that. Keep those things in mind. Because it's more expensive to replace folks than it is to like give somebody a day off, right? If you have a traditional knock, use those folks as well. You can use them as your level 1. You can utilize run books and have them run stuff for you, diagnostics, remediation, whatever. And then be flexible with your models. This is the only sort of mechanics that we kind of get into. It doesn't have to be a 24/7 on-call if that doesn't fit with your team. You can do 24/5 if your stuff isn't used on the weekend. You can use 8/5, especially if you're IT, right, for like in region. Like nobody's supposed to be doing that stuff at 8 p.m. anyway, so wait till the next morning. So in summary, when you are planning your on-call, when you're talking to your teams about on-call, when you are welcoming application engineers into the world of on-call, right? It's about reliability and user experience. We're not doing this for our health, right? We're doing it because it's cool, because it definitely isn't, right? We are worried about how we are putting our stuff out there for our users and our customers. We're also worried about our team and their health, making sure they're not burned out and they're able to handle what they've been given. We can make changes whenever we need to. It's good to have a quarterly review of your on-call practices and say, this isn't working for us. Can we change this rotation down to 3 days instead of 7? Have those conversations, because it doesn't matter. You can just change whatever. And don't overinflate priorities for things that don't matter. So with that, I have some resources on our community site, some documents, some other guides, if that's interesting for folks. We are downstairs in the exhibit hall for the afternoon as well. My colleagues would love to talk to you about all of your struggles and any questions you might have about what our product does and how it can help you there. And of course, another opportunity to win Millennium Falcon. So with that, thank you very much.
Awesome.